Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for holding this hearing. Inspector General Missel, thank you for testifying today and for the work done by your agency that you lead. The OIG does important work to serve veterans and the public by conducting meaningful, independent oversight of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Mr. Missel, the OIG report stated that under Secretary Elnahal said at a conference that the VISN directors and medical center directors would be receiving a critical skills incentive at 25% across the board. This contrasted with a signed memorandum that previous day outlining the two-tiered approach, 25% for CSIs and for VISN directors and 20% for CSIs for medical center directors, and not a flat 25% at all. Then VHA Human Resources staff changed the memorandum to reflect the CSI of 25% across the board. Can you please elaborate on this further? Did the Undersecretary misspeak at the conference, result in a 5% increase for the medical center directors, or was the initial signed memorandum incorrect?
The initial signed memorandum was 20% for medical center directors, 25% for VISN directors. He told us in testimony that he didn't recall that and that he just announced the 25% for everybody. Nobody on his staff that we could find told him that we already have this signed paper. Rather, what they did is they created another document which then gave a 25% across the board for medical center directors and VISN directors.
So, first of all, I find that the memorandum was put out to award a flat fee like that without evaluation is improper anyway. Isn't there supposed to be an evaluation on each person receiving a critical skill incentive to include, and I'm reading from the language, the employee possess a high demand skill or skill that is in a shortage. Such skill is directly related to the duties and responsibilities of the employee's position, and employment of an individual with such a skill in such a position services a critical mission-related need of the department.
That's correct. What VA policy did is they added to that to say in certain situations it may be appropriate to group employees, but the policy went further to say they must be narrowly grouped to make sure they have the same job series and same position. So all housekeepers, et cetera. In this situation, the executives, both at VBA and VHA, had very different job series. And so therefore, it was not appropriate to group them all together to get to your point.
Sure. And so my other question is that this would be, these bonuses, these critical skills incentives are supposed to be for retention and to make sure that we keep the finest quality employees here. And yet when I look at the records, it shows that VBA executives have a 2.4% turnover rate, and 60% of VBA SESs have worked at the VA for over 15 years. So we're not losing employees. Is that correct?
That's what we found, and we found there was no analysis as to whether or not it was necessary for these incentives for individuals or why they decided on 25% for each and every one.
So do you know who explicitly approved the updated memorandum in regards to what was referenced in the conference?
Dr. Elnahal signed it, signed
Okay.
that memorandum.
How much did this change in just that 5%? Do you know how much that change cost the taxpayers?
I think that was an extra $1 million. I may be a little off, but I believe it was $1 million.
Okay. The report outlined examples of employees working behind the scenes pushing for bonuses that were the same employees who received a bonus. Ranking Member Takano already referenced the same thing. And could you give us just some basic information about what recommendations you're making to make sure that this situation doesn't arise again?
Yes, one of our recommendations is to make sure that the Office of General Counsel has rules within their ethics group to make sure anybody who has a role in a policy that could benefit them financially is not involved, and that they have specifics on how to do that. So that's one of our recommendations, and we'll follow up to make sure it's done.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would yield back. Secretary McDonald, thank you so much for being here today. I have to tell you that out of all the committees that I serve on, and all the people that come before us, I give you credit. You always come in here and take the licks when we're asking the difficult questions. Even whether
Not the
we
funnest
agree or not, you are always here. I appreciate you taking ownership and testifying before the committee. However, I wish we had an opportunity to hear directly from Undersecretary Elnahal and Undersecretary Jacobs, as their actions raise the most questions. When do you think that we'll be able to have them before us?
Look, I thought it was important for me to come because for the reasons I've just spelled out, which is I feel responsible for this. And,
And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I truly do. However, the members on this committee, I assure you, they had the direct questions for Undersecretary Elnahal. They want to hear directly from the horse's mouth. Obviously, being in charge of the Veterans Administration, then you ultimately have to direct everything.
Right.
But they are the ones that took the actions and directed what took place, and that's why we really need to have them in here.
I think our entire agency, we've tried to be available to the committee. We've tried to be responsive to and transparent with the committee. I get it that we have some back and forth where we fight about that, but I think the founders had that in mind when they created this Articles 1 and Articles 2 of the Constitution. So I have every expectation that they'll continue to come up here before this committee. So, and I've noticed that you never withhold on your questions. So, but I thought it was very important for me to be here to.
Again, we just want to make sure that the people who took those actions are here to answer the questions. So as soon
We'll continue to
you
be-
can, as soon as you can urge them to be before us, it would be greatly appreciated.
We'll continue to be transparent with this committee and engage with this committee, absolutely.
Okay, the OIG report states that you didn't learn about the central office's executives had received the CSIs until alerted by VA CFO on September 13th, 2023, despite specific requests regarding the planned use of incentives in the months before they were awarded. This is the second time that there's been a major incident that you were unaware of. But to your credit, both times, you did start trying to put some actions in place to address it. I understand there's approximately 400,000 employees at the VA, and you can't know everything. However, has there been any consideration in changing some of the internal processes to ensure that you're made aware of these things earlier to prevent issues like this from even happening?
Look, I think this is why we changed delegation in September. The chairman pointed that out several minutes ago. This is why we are reviewing the entire process on these, and this is why I'm trying to create, I want to create, and this is why I think it's important for me to be here today, to demonstrate to our workforce that I own this, and I want to be in a position where I'm hearing directly from them because I'm here accountable to you.
So my understanding is that you canceled the CSIs to 182 VHA and VBA, VACO SESs, but did not cancel the CSIs to the 197 field executives.
Correct.
So why did you not cancel the CSIs for the 197 field executives, and why did we not, at a minimal, not reevaluate them utilizing the former procedure that was put in place?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Rosendale. We're obviously reviewing this. This is one of the recommendations that the Inspector General has put to us. By the same token, we have begun to review and had begun to review those field CSIs.
So had they been
frankly-
notified that the 197 that we have not rescinded those bonuses, had they been notified that those bonuses and the procedure that was utilized to award them is being reviewed?
Remember that these were two different procedures, okay? And that's the point I was just about to make, which is that the justifications for the field CSIs overwhelmingly, now I'm not ready to opine on this completely because the review is ongoing, but the evidence to date suggests they were handled in a process much more consistent with the policy that we laid out in 2023, meaning with individual justifications based on those individuals with specific market analyses to make the case that this is a particular skill in those markets to keep those personnel. And this is broadly speaking, a category of executive that we've been talking to the committee about as an agency for many years, including years before I got here, because we have churn among network directors and VAMC directors. And so I think I have believed and continue to believe that those investments are important to keep that critical leadership cadre. In fact, we've also invested in additional executives, not through incentives, but by creating additional executives in the field so that there are deputy network directors, so that the network director in 19, for example, Sunena, was able to be elevated with a firm succession plan after our earlier network director, Mr. Gallucci, retired. Our ability to have...
My time has expired, Mr. Secretary, and I'm going to yield back before I get myself in trouble with the chairman.